I'm Lisa, 32F, and I've been married to Jake, 34M, for 6 years. We have a 4-year-old son, Max, and I'm currently 6 months pregnant with our second child. I need to vent about my situation with Jake's family, particularly his sister Megan, 29F. Jake and I met during our sophomore year of college. We were both part of the campus environmental club, and I was immediately drawn to his passion for sustainability and his easygoing nature. Jake was different from the guys I dated before. He was thoughtful, funny, and seemed to have a strong sense of family values. My own family background was complicated. My parents divorced when I was 12, and the years that followed were filled with custody battles and constant tension. I spent most of my teens bouncing between my mom's apartment and my dad's house, never feeling like I had a stable home. So when I met Jake and saw how close he was with his family, I was enchanted. During our dating years, I got along well with Jake's parents, Tom, 60M, and Susan, 58F, and his sister Megan. They welcomed me with open arms, always including me in family dinners, game nights, and holiday celebrations. I remember the first Thanksgiving I spent with them. Susan taught me her secret recipe for pumpkin pie, and Megan and I stayed up late talking and laughing like old friends. I thought I had finally found the loving, stable family I always longed for. Jake proposed on our college graduation day, right after we'd received our diplomas. His entire family was there, cheering us on, and I felt like I was living a fairy tale. We got married a year later in a beautiful ceremony that Susan helped plan. Megan was my maid of honor, and I truly felt like I had gained not just a husband, but a sister too. The first cracks in this perfect picture started to appear about 6 months into our marriage. Jake, Megan, and Susan would often huddle together at family gatherings, whispering and giggling. At first, I thought they were planning surprises or discussing family matters, but as time went on, I realized they were usually gossiping about other family members or friends. One incident stands out in my memory. We were at a family barbecue, and Jake's cousin Amy had just announced her engagement. While Amy was showing off her ring to some of the other relatives, I overheard Susan, Megan, and Jake in the kitchen. They were making snide comments about Amy's fiancé, speculating that he was only marrying her for her money, and mocking Amy for being desperate enough to say yes to the first guy who asked. I was shocked. This wasn't the warm, loving family I thought I had married into. When I tried to defend Amy, saying her fiancé seemed nice and that we should be happy for them, Megan rolled her eyes and said, "Oh Lisa, you're so naive. You don't know how things work in this family yet." That comment stuck with me. It was the first time I felt like an outsider, like there was a part of this family I wasn't privy to. As time went on, I noticed more and more of these gossip sessions. They would dissect every detail of other people's lives, from their career choices to their parenting styles, always with a critical, judgmental tone. I started to distance myself from these conversations. I'd make excuses to help with dishes or play with the kids at family gatherings, anything to avoid being drawn into their negativity. This seemed to bother Susan and Megan, who began making comments about me being too good for their family talks or not having a sense of humor. The situation worsened after Max was born. I had a difficult pregnancy and an even harder time postpartum. I struggled with breastfeeding and was diagnosed with postpartum depression. Instead of the support I desperately needed, I received criticism from Susan and Megan. They would make comments about my parenting choices, saying things like, "Oh, that's not how we do things in our family," or "Max would be happier if you just listened to us." When I decided to switch to formula after weeks of painful, unsuccessful breastfeeding attempts, Susan acted like I was poisoning my baby. She would bring over bottles of express breast milk from her friend whose daughter had recently given birth, insisting it was better for Max than that store-bought stuff. Jake, instead of standing up for me, would shrug it off and say, "That's just how they are, Lisa. Don't take it personally." But I did take it personally, especially when they started trying to undermine my relationship with Max. When Max was about 2, I overheard Megan telling him, "Mommy doesn't know best, but Auntie Megan does." She was trying to convince him to eat some candy I had previously said no to. I confronted her about it, and she laughed it off as a joke. Jake, once again, told me I was overreacting. This pattern continued as Max grew older. Susan and Megan would undermine my parenting decisions at every turn. If I said no to a toy, they'd buy it behind my back. If I tried to establish a bedtime routine, they'd encourage Jake to let Max stay up late when they visited. It was a constant battle, and Jake never seemed to be on my side. Things came to a head last Christmas. Jake's family has a tradition of spending the holidays at a cabin in the mountains. I was hesitant to go, being 4 months pregnant and dealing with severe morning sickness, but Jake insisted. He said it would be good for Max to spend time with his cousins, and that the mountain air might help with my nausea. The week at the cabin was a nightmare. From the moment we arrived, Susan and Megan took over. They criticized my cooking, saying the meals I had pre-prepared weren't festive enough. They made comments about my appearance, suggesting that I wasn't dressing appropriately for a family vacation. They even complained about my lack of holiday spirit when I was too exhausted and nauseous to join in the late-night game sessions. They excluded me from family activities, saying I needed to rest because of the pregnancy, but then complained that I wasn't participating enough. I felt like I couldn't win if I rested. I was antisocial, but if I tried to join in, I was overdoing it. The breaking point came 3 days into the trip. I overheard Susan, Megan, and Jake planning to take Max sledding on a particularly steep hill that I had expressly forbidden due to safety concerns. When I confronted them, Megan rolled her eyes and said, "Stop being such a helicopter mom, Lisa. We know what's best for Max." I lost my temper. I told them they had no right to undermine my parenting decisions, that I was Max's mother and my rules needed to be respected. I pointed out how they had been constantly criticizing and belittling me, not just during this trip but for years. Jake, instead of backing me up, told me to calm down and stop ruining the holiday. He said I was being too sensitive and that his family was just trying to help. In that moment, I saw clearly how Jake would always choose his mother and sister over me. I was so upset that I packed up my things and Max's, called a cab, and left the cabin that night, despite the heavy snow. It was a long, cold ride back to the city, but I felt a sense of relief being away from the constant criticism and undermining. Jake didn't come after us. He stayed at the cabin with his family for 3 more days before returning home. When he did, he acted like nothing had happened and expected me to apologize for overreacting and ruining the family Christmas. I'm at a loss. I love Jake, and I know he can be a good father and partner when his family isn't around. But I can't stand the way his family treats me, and I'm furious at his lack of support. With another baby on the way, I'm worried about the future and how this toxic family dynamic will affect our children. I find myself thinking back to my own childhood, to the instability and conflict I experienced. I had promised myself that I would create a different environment for my own children, one filled with love and support. Instead, I feel like I'm subjecting them to a different kind of dysfunction. I've tried talking to Jake about this numerous times over the years. I've suggested family therapy, setting boundaries with his mother and sister, even moving to a different city to get some distance. But Jake always dismisses my concerns, saying I'm too sensitive or that I don't understand how families work. I'm scared about the future. I don't want my children growing up thinking it's normal or okay to constantly criticize and undermine others. I don't want Max and our unborn child to see their mother constantly belittled and disrespected. But I also don't want to break up our family. I feel trapped and alone. My own family lives across the country, and over the years, I've lost touch with many of my friends as I've become more isolated in Jake's family bubble. I don't know who to turn to or what to do. Am I overreacting? How do I handle this situation? I feel like I'm fighting a losing battle against Jake's family, and I'm not sure how much more I can take. Any advice would be greatly appreciated. Update 1, it's been 2 months since my original post, and a lot has happened. I'm now 8 months pregnant and things with Jake and his family have only gotten worse. After the Christmas cabin fiasco, Jake and I had a long talk. I explained how hurt I was by his family's behavior and his lack of support. I told him about all the times I had felt belittled, criticized, and undermined by his mother and sister. I shared how their constant interference was affecting my relationship with Max and my confidence as a mother. To my surprise, Jake seemed to really listen this time. He admitted that he had been avoiding conflict and that he knew his mother and sister could be overbearing. He promised to talk to them about respecting our boundaries and to make more of an effort to support me. For a while, things seemed to improve. Susan and Megan were less overtly critical during their visits, and Jake made an effort to stand up for me when they did make snide comments. I started to hope that maybe we could work things out, that we could find a way to coexist peacefully with Jake's family. However, last month, everything fell apart again. It was Max's 4th birthday, and we had planned a small party at our house with some of his friends from preschool. I had spent weeks planning it, wanting it to be special for Max. I had ordered a custom cake with his favorite superhero, planned age-appropriate games, and even hired a face painter. The morning of the party, Susan and Megan showed up unannounced, saying they wanted to help set up. I had everything under control, but they insisted on taking over. They rearranged the decorations I had carefully put up, saying the colors I had chosen weren't boyish enough. They changed the party games I had planned, insisting that the ones I had chosen were too babyish for 4-year-olds. But what really upset me was when they tried to alter the cake I had ordered to Max's specifications. Megan decided that the superhero theme was overdone and tried to scrape off some of the decorations to replace them with generic birthday candles. When I objected, she said, "Oh, Lisa, you're so pregnant you can barely move. Let us handle this." We know what Max likes better anyway. I was furious but tried to keep calm for Max's sake. I didn't want to cause a scene and ruin his special day. So I bit my tongue and let them take over, feeling like a guest at my own son's birthday party. During the party, Susan and Megan dominated everything. They led the games, served the food, and even opened some of Max's presents for him. I felt like a spectator, watching from the sidelines as they played the role of doting grandmother and aunt. What hurt the most was seeing how much Max seemed to enjoy their attention. He laughed at their jokes, eagerly participated in the games they organized, and kept running to show them his presents instead of me. I knew it wasn't his fault, he's just a child who loves his grandmother and aunt. But it felt like they were stealing these precious moments from me. The final straw came when it was time to sing happy birthday and cut the cake. As I was about to light the candles, Megan swooped in, took the lighter from my hand, and said loudly, "Let me do it, Lisa. We don't want you setting yourself on fire in your condition." I saw red. In front of all the guests, other parents and children from Max's preschool, I told Megan and Susan that they needed to leave immediately. I couldn't take it anymore. The constant undermining, the way they had taken over my son's birthday, the implication that I couldn't even light a candle for my own child, it was too much. They acted shocked and hurt, playing the victims. Susan started crying, saying she couldn't believe I would kick out Max's loving grandmother on his birthday. Megan accused me of being hormonal and unstable. Jake, who had been mostly absent during the party, chatting with some of the other dads, finally intervened, not to support me, but to tell me I was embarrassing the family. He pulled me aside and hissed that I was making a scene and needed to apologize to his mother and sister. I refused. For the first time, I stood my ground completely. I told Jake that if he didn't back me up, he could leave too. To my shock and hurt, he did. He left with Susan and Megan, leaving me to finish hosting the party alone. After the guests left, Jake and I had a huge fight. He accused me of overreacting and ruining Max's birthday. When I pointed out how his mother and sister had taken over and disrespected me in my own home, he dismissed my concerns, saying they were just trying to help. He couldn't seem to understand why I was so upset. The next day, I received a barrage of texts from Susan and Megan. They called me ungrateful, dramatic, and a bad mother. They even suggested that my pregnancy hormones were making me unstable and that Jake should be concerned about leaving Max alone with me. Jake saw the messages but said nothing to defend me. I've reached my breaking point. I told Jake that I need some space to think about our future. I've taken Max and gone to stay with my best friend, Sarah, for a while. Sarah has been my rock through all of this, offering a sympathetic ear and a safe place to stay. Jake has been calling and texting nonstop, alternating between apologies and accusations. One minute he's begging me to come home, saying he'll do anything to fix things. The next, he's telling me I'm tearing apart the family and hurting Max by keeping him away from his father and grandparents. I'm due to give birth in about a month, and I'm terrified about what's going to happen. I love Jake, but I don't know if I can continue in a marriage where I'm constantly disrespected and undermined, especially with 2 young children to consider. I'm considering my options, including marriage counseling, but I'm not sure Jake will agree to it. He still doesn't seem to understand the gravity of the situation. He thinks if I just let things go and stop being so sensitive, everything will be fine. But I can't go back to the way things were. I can't raise my children in an environment where their mother is constantly belittled and disrespected. I'm also worried about the legal implications if I decide to separate, especially with a newborn on the way. I've started researching my rights and options, but it's also overwhelming. The thought of a custody battle terrifies me, especially given how close Jake is with his family. I'm afraid they'll try to paint me as an unstable, hormonal mother who's unfit to care for her children. Max has been asking when we're going home, and it breaks my heart. He misses his dad and his room and his toys. I'm trying to keep things as normal as possible for him, but I know he senses that something is wrong. I'm worried about the long-term effects this situation might have on him. As for the pregnancy, the stress of all this has been taking its toll. My blood pressure has been high at my last few checkups, and my doctor has warned me about the risks of preterm labor if I don't find ways to reduce my stress levels. But I don't know how to do that when my entire life feels like it's falling apart. I find myself lying awake at night, wondering how I got here. I think back to the early days of my relationship with Jake, how happy and in love we were, how welcomed I felt by his family. Was it all an illusion? Were the signs there from the beginning and I was too blinded by my desire for a loving family to see them? Has anyone been in a similar situation? How did you handle it? I feel so alone and scared about the future, but I know I need to do what's best for my children and myself. Any advice or words of support would be greatly appreciated. Update 2. It's been 3 weeks since my last update, and I'm now 38 weeks pregnant. The situation with Jake and his family has taken an unexpected turn. After staying with Sarah for a week, Jake finally agreed to meet and talk without his family present. We met at a neutral location, a quiet cafe near our house. I laid out all my grievances and made it clear that things couldn't continue as they were. To my surprise, Jake broke down. He admitted that he had always struggled to stand up to his mother and sister, and that he knew their behavior was wrong. He revealed that growing up, his father was often absent due to work, and his mother and sister formed a tight unit that he felt he needed to be a part of to receive love and attention. Jake shared stories from his childhood that helped me understand his behavior better. He told me about times when he tried to assert himself against his mother or sister, only to be met with guilt-tripping and emotional manipulation. He described feeling like he was constantly walking on eggshells, afraid of upsetting the delicate balance in his family. This revelation didn't excuse his behavior, but it did help me understand it better. Jake agreed to start couples therapy with me, and also to see a therapist individually to work on his issues with his family. He promised to set firm boundaries with Susan and Megan, and to prioritize our nuclear family over his extended family. I was cautiously optimistic, but still wary. We agreed that I would return home, but with the condition that Susan and Megan were not allowed to visit without my explicit permission. Jake also promised to run all communication with his family by me first, to ensure we were presenting a united front. For 2 weeks, things were better. Jake was attentive and supportive. He handled all communication with his family, politely but firmly declining their requests to visit or speak to Max on the phone. He even told them they wouldn't be allowed in the delivery room when I gave birth, something I had been worried about. I started to feel hopeful again. Maybe, with therapy and clear boundaries, we could make this work. I began to relax and focus on preparing for the baby's arrival. However, yesterday, everything changed again. I went into premature labor. It started with mild contractions in the morning, which I initially dismissed as Braxton Hicks. But by afternoon, they had intensified, and I realized this was the real thing. In the chaos and panic of getting to the hospital, Jake called his mother and sister without consulting me. By the time I realized what was happening, they were already in the delivery room, with Megan filming the birth despite my objections. The stress of their presence made my labor more difficult. I felt violated and betrayed. Every time I looked up, I saw Susan's anxious face or Megan's camera pointed at me. I wanted to scream at them to leave, but I was in too much pain to do more than shake my head. Jake, seeing my distress, finally asked them to leave, but the damage was done. They retreated to the waiting room, but knowing they were just outside made it hard for me to relax and focus on the birth. Our daughter, Emma, was born healthy despite being slightly premature. But what should have been one of the happiest moments of my life was tainted by Jake's betrayal and his family's intrusion. Now, I'm in the hospital, recovering and bonding with Emma. Jake is here, full of apologies and excuses. He says he panicked when I went into labor and reverted to old habits of leaning on his mother and sister. He swears it won't happen again, that he'll do better. But I don't know if I can believe him anymore. This was such a fundamental betrayal of my trust, at one of the most vulnerable moments of my life. How can I ever trust him to put our family first? Susan and Megan have been blowing up Jake's phone, demanding to see the baby. So far, he's kept them away, but I can see the strain it's putting on him. I'm worried that as soon as I'm discharged, he'll cave to their demands again. I'm at a crossroads. Part of me wants to believe that Jake can change, that we can work this out for the sake of our children. But another part of me feels like this was the last straw, that I'll never be able to trust him to put our family first. I know I need to focus on recovering and taking care of Emma right now, but I can't help but worry about what comes next. How do I protect my children from this toxic family dynamic? Can Jake ever truly break free from his mother and sister's influence? I'm considering asking Jake to move out temporarily once I'm discharged from the hospital, to give me space to think and to see if he's truly capable of maintaining boundaries with his family. But I'm scared of being alone with a newborn and a toddler. The nurses have been wonderful, offering support and even contacting a hospital social worker to talk with me about my options. But I know I'll have to face the real world soon, and I'm not sure I'm ready. Any advice on how to navigate this situation would be greatly appreciated. I feel like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff, and I'm not sure which way to step. Update 3. It's been 2 months since Emma was born, and I've made some difficult decisions. After we returned from the hospital, I asked Jake to stay with a friend for a while. I needed space to recover, bond with Emma, and think about our future without his or his family's influence. It was a hard conversation, but Jake understood and agreed it was necessary. During this time, Jake seemed to finally understand the gravity of the situation. He continued with his therapy, both individual and couple sessions, which we did via video call. He maintained firm boundaries with Susan and Megan, only communicating with them minimally and never allowing them to visit. I focused on healing, both physically and emotionally. The postpartum period was challenging, especially with a newborn and a toddler to care for, but I found strength I didn't know I had. My friend Sarah was a godsend, coming over often to help with Max and bringing meals. Jake and I had several long, honest conversations during this time. We talked about our childhoods, our expectations for our marriage, and our hopes for our children's future. It was painful at times, but also cathartic. I felt like we were finally truly communicating. However, about 3 weeks ago, I discovered that Jake had been secretly meeting with Susan and Megan. A mutual friend saw them at a cafe and mentioned it to me, thinking I knew about it. Jake claimed he was trying to make them understand our perspective, to explain why we needed space and boundaries. But I felt betrayed once again. This discovery made me realize that despite his efforts, Jake might never be able to fully prioritize our family over his mother and sister. The pull of his childhood dynamics was too strong, the patterns too ingrained. After much soul-searching and several tearful conversations with Jake, I decided that for the sake of my mental health and my children's well-being, I needed to end our marriage. It was the hardest decision I've ever made, but I felt it was necessary. I consulted with a lawyer and filed for divorce last week. Jake was devastated but didn't fight it. I think on some level, he understands that he can't be the husband and father we need him to be while still maintaining his enmeshed relationship with his mother and sister. We're now in the process of working out custody arrangements. I'm pushing for full custody with supervised visitation for Jake, at least initially. My main concern is ensuring that Susan and Megan have limited access to Max and Emma. I don't want my children exposed to their toxic behavior or manipulative tactics. It's been a difficult journey, and I know there are more challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm making the right decision for myself and my children. I'm no longer constantly walking on eggshells or worrying about the next criticism or boundary violation. I'm focusing on healing and building a stable, loving environment for Max and Emma. I've started seeing a therapist to work through my own issues and to learn how to co-parent effectively with Jake while maintaining strong boundaries. Max has been struggling with the changes, which breaks my heart. He misses his dad and doesn't understand why we can't all live together anymore. I'm doing my best to reassure him and maintain as much stability as possible in his life. We've started play therapy to help him process his emotions. As for Emma, she's thriving despite all the turmoil. She's a happy, healthy baby, and watching her grow and develop brings me joy every day. I'm determined to create a peaceful, loving home for her and Max, free from the constant tension and conflict that marked the last few years. Looking back, I can see how my own childhood experiences led me to ignore red flags in my relationship with Jake and his family. My desire for a stable, loving family made me overlook issues that I should have addressed much earlier. But I'm trying not to dwell on regrets. Instead, I'm focusing on the future and on being the best mother I can be to my children. Thank you to everyone who offered advice and support throughout this ordeal. Your words gave me strength when I needed it most. To anyone in a similar situation, remember that you deserve respect and support. Don't be afraid to stand up for yourself and your children, even if it means making tough choices. The road ahead won't be easy, but I'm hopeful for the future. For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe freely. I'm rediscovering who I am outside of Jake's family's influence, and I'm excited to see what the future holds for me and my children.